around the globe. It gives me a great pleasure to extend you all a very warm welcome. I, on behalf of Director SARC Energy Center, thankful to all of you for joining us in this webinar on international protocols related to emissions from thermal power plants. My name is Ehsanullah Marwat and I am working as Research Fellow Energy Efficiency at SARC Energy Center, Islamabad. With me, I have Ms. Mehnaz Gardezi. She is working as Communication Specialist at SARC Energy Center. We shall be moderating today's session. Ladies and gentlemen, in this webinar, we will discuss international protocols and emissions from thermal power plants and implications of Paris Agreement on thermal power generation. I am extremely grateful to our elite panel of presenters, including Dr. Imran Ali Shah and Mr. Tularam Paudel. Ms. Mehnaz shall be introducing them in detail before the start of their relevant sessions. It is my pleasure to inform you that the Deputy Director, SARC Energy Center, Dr. Tanveer Ahmed, has also joined us in this webinar. Now I may request Dr. Tanveer Ahmed, Deputy Director of SARC Energy Center, for opening remarks. Sir, please.
Thank you, Ehsan. Dear participants and presenters of the webinar, good morning, everyone. I, Dr. Tanveer Ahmed, Deputy Director of SARC Energy Center and Program Leader Technology Transfer, welcome you all to this webinar on international protocols related to emissions from thermal power plants. Air pollution has been a major focus of international environmental agreements, and since 1970s, over 60 multilateral treaties, protocols, and amendments have been put in place to address this issue. We have the COP26 next month, and I hope that the world will now move to proper actions to achieve the long-term temperature goal adopted in the Paris Agreement of holding temperature increase to well below 2 degrees centigrade and to pursue efforts to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels. This requires a rapid decarbonization of the global power sector. Measures such as choice of fuel use, and measures to increase conversion in energy efficiency can reduce emissions of multiple air pollutants, including carbon dioxide and per unit of energy generation. Dear participants, the webinar experts will share their knowledge and experience with you and will respond to all your questions. I'm delighted to acknowledge the great cooperation and support extended by them. I would like to thank you all for joining this event. I expect this webinar to be an interactive session, so please feel free to join the discussion and express your valuable opinions. With these words, I declare the session open and wish you all a very comfortable learning and knowledge sharing experience. Now I request Ms. Mehnaz Gardezi to take us through the agenda. Over to you, Mehnaz.
Thank you, Dr. Tanveer, for your time and valuable remarks. Good morning, dear audience. My name is Mehnaz Gardezi and I am working as Communications Specialist at SARC Energy Center, Islamabad. Dear audience, before proceeding with the agenda, I would like to draw your attention towards some important points related to today's session. Please note that agenda of this webinar is already available on SEC website and you can also access it through GoToWebinar panel on your screen in the handout section. All presentations are brief report on webinar and its recording link will also be uploaded on SEC website. There will be a brief question and answer session after the presentations. Participants will have the opportunity to ask questions to our presenters by typing your questions under the questions tab on the GoToWebinar panel on your screen. Please also mention the name of your presenters to whom you would like to address your questions. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentations. We shall be asking questions on your behalf. Due to time limitations, we apologize in advance if we are unable to address your questions. Dear audience, Our today's webinar's very first presenter is Dr. Imran Ali Shah. He is research and knowledge analyst with Government of Pakistan. He has doctorate degree in heating, gas supply, ventilation, and air conditioning engineering from one of prestigious University of China. His research focus is based on the cleaner production of bioenergy. He is well conversant with thermal energy processes, its modeling, simulations, and he has also contributed to around 7 international level peer-reviewed journal publications. Dr. Shah has 12 years of expertise in technical project management along with research and development. His present position as research and knowledge analyst involves technical backstopping through critical research analysis of Government of Pakistan's national level development sector programs, which includes multi-sectoral socio-economic initiatives aligned with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. With this, I would like to Dr. Shah to proceed with his presentations and thoughts on international protocols on emissions from thermal power plants. Over to you, Dr. Shah.
Many thanks for inviting me here to present on this topic. Thanks for the detailed introduction of myself. I'm directed to present on this topic, which is international protocols related to emissions from thermal power plants. So today I'm going to present on certain protocols, international level protocols, which covers all the mandatory emission control strategies and programs. So it started from Montreal Protocol, then shifted to Kyoto Protocol. The IPCC is one of the general body to continue this protocol and such kind of programs. Paris Agreement is the current program on this one, and at the end references will be available. So let me start. Climate change. Climate change has emerged as one of the key issues in the early years and this 21st century, and it's concerned about human relations to nature, the responsibility of rich nations to poorer. That is the main issue in the Kyoto Protocol. Then we will discuss about the links from local activities to global conditions and the obligations of present to future generations. At the international level, the response to climate change has become framed with these three key narratives. Number one, asserting that dangerous climate change must be avoided. Number two, that the responsibility for climate change is common but differentiated, and that the market in the form of carbon trading is the best way to reduce the danger. So these narratives were powerful enough to formalize in International Climate Convention that include the 1992 United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and 1997 Kyoto Protocol. So we'll start from Montreal Protocol. Actually, it was adopted on 16 September 1987. The main focus was for the preservation of the ozone layer, and it was entered into force 1991 through the consent of parties, number 197 parties. The objective of this protocol was the international treaty designed to protect the ozone layer by phasing out the production and consumption of numerous substances, that is chlorofluorocarbons, responsible for ozone depletion. Although challenges remain, the Montreal Protocol has been recognized as a global success, demonstrated by the massive elimination of production and consumption of CFCs. Okay, although challenges remain, the Montreal Protocol has been recognized as a global success, demonstrated by the massive elimination of production and consumption of CFCs, halogens, carbon tetrachloride, and methyl chloroform. These are certain chemicals which are the causing agent for the ozone depletion. So for this protocol, the financial mechanism was implementation for the implementation of this Montreal Protocol, established by a decision of the second meeting of the parties to the Montreal Protocol, held in London in June 1990 and began its operation in 1991. So two types of financial mechanism were there: a multilateral fund and a global environmental facility. The objectives were to, for MLF, multilateral fund, to assist developing country parties to the Montreal Protocol whose annual per capita consumption and production of ozone depleting substance is less than 0.3 kg to comply with the control measure of the protocol. Whereas for Global Environment Facility, it assisted 18 countries with economies in transition in Eastern Europe and former Soviet Union in meeting their obligations to phase out the use and production of ozone depleting substances. So activities were actually three kind of activities were there: industrial conversion, technical assistance, and training and capacity building worth over US dollar 2.8 billion. The mode of activities were as a multilateral fund replenished based on the principle of stable and sufficient funding to support the developing countries by the developed nations to meet protocol's objectives. This kind of this mode was continued even after the closing of Montreal Protocol. It was shifted to Kyoto Protocol, and still it's in existence with the Paris Agreement. Implementing agency was the UNDP. The achievements for UNDP were like assisted partner developing countries to assess a total of US dollar 630 million in funding from multilateral fund and US dollar 33.5 million from Global Environment Facility. So next protocol was Kyoto Protocol, which was adopted in 1997, entered into force 2005, and 192 countries were the parties for this protocol. The main goal was to operationalize the UNFCCC, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, by committing industrialized countries and economies in transit in Eastern Europe to limit and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So the focus was shifted from ozone depleting material to greenhouse gas emissions in accordance with the agreed individual targets. The convention itself only asked countries to adopt policies and measures on mitigation and to report periodically. The mechanism was based on the principles and provisions of the convention, and actually it follows on annex-based structure. There were different types of annexes: Annex 1 and non-Annex 1. Annex 1 was, I'll show in the next slides. These were the developing countries, and some of them were the developed nations. So actually, this Kyoto Protocol, it is considered that one of the flaws of this Kyoto Protocol, that it only binds developed countries and places a heavier burden on them under the principle of common but differentiated responsibility and respective capabilities, because it recognizes that they are largely responsible for the current high level of GHG emissions in the atmosphere. At the end of this slide, Kyoto Protocol portion, I'll show you either it was a success or a kind of failure. But because let's go through the commitments. There were two kind of commitment periods: first 2008 to 12, and second was 13 to 2020. Both the commitment periods have had their own objectives, but similar kind. Kyoto Protocol sets binding emission reduction targets for 37 industrialized countries and economies in transition. And overall, these targets add up to average 5% emission reduction compared to 1990 levels over the 5-year period. On comparison to the second commitment period, it is actually called as Aloha Pact, was held on 8 December 2012, and it was the 18th session of the COP, Conference of the Parties, serving as a meeting of the parties. The targets for first commitment period comprises reduction of the main greenhouse gases. 6 types of gases were there in the first commitment period, whereas another gas nitrogen trifluoride. It was added in the second commitment period. The driving force for the such commitment periods were based on the occurrence of the global warming, the driving forces for this protocol. So the maximum amount of emissions that a party may emit over a commitment period in order to comply with its emission target is known as the party's assigned amount. That was actually the terminology used for during this Kyoto Protocol. Financial mechanism was based on the adaptation fund, which was actually based on three different types of financial mechanisms. So actually the sectors or the source categories which were covered through this Kyoto Protocol were and main energy, fuel combustion, where industries, energy industries, transport, manufacturing industries, and construction were involved, and the fugitive emission from fuels, from the burning of fuels, solid fuels, coal, oil, and natural gas. The second was industrial processes, mineral products, chemical industries, metal production, and the binding material, for example, the cement sector, which emit an enormous quantity of carbon dioxide because of the calcination of calcium carbonate used as a material for manufacturing of the cement. Agriculture is another sector under Kyoto Protocol. Entry fermentation, manure management, rice cultivation, prescribed burning of savannas, and open burning in the field in the agricultural land. That's another major cause for producing smoke and fog, and or particulate matters. And waste incineration is a main focus nowadays, because solid waste disposal is either on the land or to convert it to some useful items, but it's very rare. The emission level, if we compare it with the 1970s till now, so all these four major, these seven major greenhouse gases, CO2, nitrous oxide, methane, and chlorofluorocarbons, they are exceeding since the 1970s. And the focus was to control that emission at a certain level. So that's why this Kyoto Protocol was set into existence. The parties overview, when we see this globe, we see different colors. Actually, these were the parties which some of them are participants, some of them are not included in the Annex 1. So Annex parties, the green one is Annex parties with binding targets in the second period. The purple color is Annex parties with binding targets in the first period, but not in the second. That was Russia. Non-Annex parties without binding targets, the blue one. So major portion were the developing countries which were not included in the Kyoto Protocol. That was one of the reasons for this so-called failure. Annex parties with binding targets in the first period, but which withdrew from the protocol, that was Canada, which withdrew from the protocol. Signatories to the protocol that have not ratified, that US, and other UN member states and observers that are not party to the protocol. These are the certain quantified emission limitations or reduction commitments for both the commitment period, and is covered in the Annex B of the protocol. For example, in the second column, this emission limitation that was fixed for all the countries participants. It was actually 108 for Australia, so they had to reduce 8% of their emission and to reach that 1990 level. And in the second period, it was reduced, and the reference here is given in the fourth column, from where the ratio, the percentage is extracted. So on left side we have European nations on one side, and then the European Union, Kazakhstan, Monaco, Norway, Switzerland. Most of the European nations were the parties for this Kyoto Protocol. The annual carbon dioxide emission is mentioned here. Annual carbon dioxide emission from fuel combustion between 1990 to 2009 for the Kyoto Annex 1 and non-Annex 1 parties. You can see the comparison. In the left figure, that straight line non-Annex 1 parties, the emission, actually the CO2 emission was exceeded by the non-participants or non-Annex 1 parties, which were actually the developing nations. And India is one of them, which is a major producer of carbon dioxide gas. So even after the implication of this Kyoto Protocol, so the CO2 emission was reduced by these Annex 1 Kyoto parties, but on the overall side, you see the overall CO2 emission was exceeded. On right hand side, annual per capita carbon dioxide emission from fuel combustion is given for the Kyoto Annex 1 and non-Annex 1 parties. Okay, Kyoto Protocol, the financial mechanism which was implemented for the implementation of this Kyoto Protocol was adaptation fund, which was established in 2001 to finance concrete adaptation projects and programs in developing country parties to the Kyoto Protocol and that are particularly vulnerable to the adverse effects of climate change. The fund is financed with the share of proceeds from clean development mechanism project activities and other sources. So there were actually three kind of financial sources for this adaptation fund. The clean development mechanism was one of them. International emissions trading was the second one, and joint implementation. So they had kind of trading units in the carbon market. For example, a removal unit, RMU, on the basis of land use change and forestry. Then emission reduction units, ERU, generated by a joint implementation project. Certified emission reductions generated from a clean development mechanism project activity. So the main mechanism for this kind of carbon trade was like to shift the activities and other sources of funding. Share of proceeds, in case of CDM, clean development mechanism, the share of proceeds amounts to 2% of certified emission reduction issued for a CDM project activity. The CDM defined in Article 12 of the protocol allows a country with an emission reduction or emission limitation commitment under the Kyoto Protocol to implement an emission reduction project in developing countries. Such projects can earn saleable certified emission reduction CER credits, each equivalent to 1 ton of CO2, which can be counted towards meeting Kyoto targets. The second financial arrangement for adaptation fund was international emissions trading, and the third one joint implementation on the same principle of the clean development mechanism. So composition of the adaptation fund, there was a board which is composed of 16 members and 16 alternate representing parties to the Kyoto Protocol, taking into account fair and balanced representation among group as follows. So that was the board which governed the Kyoto Protocol implementation. So land use change and forestry was it was initiated as the rate of buildup of CO2 in the atmosphere can be reduced by taking advantage of the fact that atmospheric CO2 can accumulate as carbon in vegetation and soil in terrestrial ecosystem. So that's why in Pakistan, billion trees tsunami, Pakistan government initiative has been taken to combat with that climate change caused by the CO2 emissions. Climate change success or global warming failure. So let's have a discussion on this. The success or failure of Kyoto Protocol. Many argue that Kyoto's failure is due to deficiencies in the structure. So the exemption of developing countries from reduction in requirements, I already have mentioned in earlier slides that the Kyoto Protocol didn't cover all the CO2 or greenhouse gases emitting countries, but it was focused only on the developed countries. Whereby, on the other hand, the non-developed countries or developing countries, they were keeping continue emitting the CO2 or GHGs. So next, the lack of an effective emissions trading scheme. That was one of the reasons. Because of this, and most Annex 1 countries have chosen to not comply with Kyoto commitments. Kyoto Protocol target was 4.7% CO2 reduction by 2012. One of the key reasons might be the collapse of the Soviet Union. It's on the political side, but actually it was happened. So it had a huge impact on CO2 mitigation or climate change. There was a rapid decline in heavy manufacturing industries across Russia and the newly independent states. This collapse was particularly significant in Russia and Ukraine, the two largest energy consumption in this group. It resulted in a rapid decline in energy consumption of the Kyoto Protocol. We see on these figures on the left side, left bottom, Kyoto Protocol carbon emission from 1990 to 2012. Uh, the blue one is all other parties. The black line is all Kyoto parties with targets, and the Russian Federation plus Ukraine, that is in green color. So in only these Russian Federation plus Ukraine and other Central Asian nations, the CO2 emission was reduced by 32.4%, which impacted on the overall reduction of 12.5%. Whereby, if we see the target, it was 4.7%. On the other hand, if you can see that the whole load of that CO2 reduction was put on that Russia and and that Soviet Union. So that was one of the reasons for this failure. Next is Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It has a goal for assessing the science related to climate change, to provide policymakers with regular scientific assessment on climate change, its implications and potential future risks. Creation was in 1988. 195 members are there. Three kind of working groups are working, and which deals with the physical science basis of climate change, with climate change impacts and adaptation and vulnerability, and deals with mitigation of climate change. Main objective of task force involved in IPCC implementation on national greenhouse gas inventories is to develop and refine a methodology for the calculation and reporting of national greenhouse gas emissions and removals. It's a IPCC progress starting from 1988 since its creation till so far. So I'll just go through the major progress of the done by IPCC. The sixth report, synthesis report on the to the sixth assessment report is going to be published by next year. But so far, Climate Change 2021 approved physical science basis, the working group 1 contribution to the sixth assessment report has already been published. Paris Agreement, a legally binding international treaty on climate change. It was adopted in 2015 at Conference of Parties 21 in Paris, entered into force 2016, and 196 countries are the parties for this Paris Agreement. The goal is to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees centigrade, preferably to 1.5 degrees Celsius, compared to pre-industrialized levels. To achieve this long-term temperature goal, countries aim to reach global peaking of greenhouse gas emissions as soon as possible to achieve a climate neutral world by mid-century. The Paris Agreement is a landmark for the multilateral climate change process because for the first time, a binding agreement brings all nations into a common cause to undertake ambitious effort to combat climate change and adapt to its effects. The mechanism is for the implementation of Paris Agreement requires economic and social transformation based on the best available science. The Paris Agreement works on a 5-year cycle of increasingly ambitious climate action carried out by countries. By 2020, countries submit their plans for climate action known as nationally determined contributions (NDCs). Countries communicate actions they will take to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions in order to reach the goals of the Paris Agreement. Countries also communicate in the NDCs action they will take to build resilience to adapt to the impact of rising temperature. The coordination is actually it provides a framework for financial, technical, and capacity building support to those countries who need it. Three kind of support is available. That is finance, financing, technology, and capacity building. In terms of finance, the Paris Agreement affirms that developed countries should take the lead in providing financial assistance to countries that are less endowed and more vulnerable. while for the first time also encouraging voluntary contributions by other parties. Climate finance is needed for mitigation because large-scale investments are required, and it's equally important for adaptation, as significant financial resources are needed to adapt to the adverse effects and reduce the impacts of the climate change. The technology, on the other hand, it is fully realizing technology development and transfer for both improving resilience to climate change and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Capacity building, not all developing countries have sufficient capacities so far to deal with many of the challenges brought by climate change. As a result, the Paris Agreement places great emphasis on climate-related capacity building for developing countries and requests all developed countries to enhance support for capacity building actions in developing nations. The achievements by Paris Agreements, what we have achieved so far. So, although climate change actions need to be massively increased to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement, the years since its entry into force have already sparked low carbon solutions and new markets. A new terminology, negative carbon dioxide emissions, or near zero emission climate change related technologies have been developed, and enormous research and development is going on to find environment friendly technologies. More and more countries, regions, cities, and companies are establishing carbon neutrality targets. Zero carbon solutions becoming competitive across economic sectors, representing 25% of emissions. The trend is almost noticeable in the power and transport sector and has created many new business opportunities for early movers, such as hybrid vehicles or electrical driven vehicles. By 2030, zero carbon solutions could be competitive in sector representing 70% of the global emissions. References are, I have got this information from these papers, these different kind of reports. Thank you so much. Any questions? Welcome.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pranalisha. It was indeed a very crisp and to the point presentation, and it's a well-known issue and bodies favor of it. But there is one interesting question that how you see the argument of a few developing countries, including Pakistan, having their coal resource untapped and they want to utilize it for power generation, when such treaties, protocol, and agreements discourage coal usage. So how you can, narrate their argument?
Exactly. All right. Thank you. Actually, if we compare the CO2 emissions emitted by only Pakistan, or if compared with the SAARC countries or globally, you'll see it's almost a negligible amount of CO2 being emitted by Pakistan. So, on the other hand, because we have a huge reservoir of coal resources in major region, it's around more than 10,000 square kilometer area covered with the moderate quality of coal. So, but there are in the Paris Agreement, the achievements show that there are certain technologies, near zero emission technologies or ultra supercritical technologies, where the black coal or any kind of carbon based material can be used, and with the minimum emission of CO2, and the technologies exist such as carbon dioxide capture and storage. So still, because actually it was one of the failure for Kyoto Protocol, because most of the developed countries, they prefer economical boost rather than to coincide with the to agree with the Kyoto Protocol. For Pakistan being a developing country, it's pertinent to use coal because it is the only one of the sources which is easily available in Pakistan, but with the surety to implement the carbon dioxide capturing technologies. So using that kind of technologies, we can use coal, but to a certain extent, because we have certain power plants which still have which are emitting certain level of CO2. but there are technologies available which we have to adopt.
Right. I'll a little bit elaborate or add the same question because I have similar experience and it's my own analysis that when we are at the time when we were supposed to utilize coal, we didn't. So now when the whole world is moving toward renewables, and I have a case studies because we discussed specifically Pakistan case. So at the time when whole world was, I mean, dismantling CNG, discouraging CNG, so we bought all that waste equipment to Pakistan, and we became the almost first or second utilizer of CNG in the whole world. I mean, we were ranked first or second. So, but no, that's all become obsolete. So instead of investing in that old, which we haven't utilized when it was the right time. So isn't it better that we should go for renewables?
Sure, sure. That's the future. That's the future for energy. That is the main future. We can actually obtaining 100% energy out from renewable energy. That is not possible.
True.
So we have to meet our energy demand. For that, the percentage of that, the share for fossil fuel utilization with that of renewable energy, that can be optimized. That can be optimized with the advent of new technologies. So that's true. But still, we cannot deny using fossilized fuel. Although all the nations are going to adopt renewable energy, but that is not adequate to meet all the energy requirements. So there should be certain balance in between these two technologies.
Right. Got it. So we have another question. It's again in Pakistan's perspective. If you have some information that want to know that does Pakistan has emission control law specific to thermal power plants that exist in different regions?
We have an environment department, environmental protection agency. They have national environmental quality standards, NEQS, and actually that exists. The standard exists for industrial emission control, national emission quality standards by environmental protection agency.
Okay. So those standards also cover emissions from thermal power plants, like there is some.
Actually, it's more focused on industrial. So thermal power plants are actually under that.
It's
Ambient industries, yes.
Right. We have one last question that without any penalties or repercussions for rich countries who fail to meet their climate targets, do you think Paris Agreement is deemed like previous agreements such as CDMs and NAMA?
Actually, Paris Agreement is a bit different than the Kyoto Protocol. It gives a certain ratio for that CO2 emission limitation. In Kyoto Protocol, that was a kind of failure because so many researchers they argue about that topic. But as far as for Paris agreements, we have solutions for in terms of forestation, in terms of producing more and more CO2 sinks in the world. So that's the main only solution for this for the success of this Paris agreement. So that can be achieved, but earlier saying that it would be a kind of failure. No, it's not. It's not. It's working well.
We are getting questions every time. I think it's last, but we have another question. By increasing the coal-based power plants in Pakistan, SOx and NOx emissions are also increasing, and no one is talking about it. Any standards upgradation regarding it? Almost it's similar question, but yes.
Yeah. For NOx, there are NOx nitrogen reducing. No, actually there are certain technologies. Low NOx burners are there. Low NOx burners. Oxy-combustion is one of the best option for reducing NOx. And for SOx, for coal, we have because we have a moderate quality of coal in Pakistan, which is low quality bituminous, we can see, or high quality lignite coal. So it has a certain percentage of sulfur, but there are certain technologies available, because for the combustion, instead of pulverized combustion, or bubble fluidizing bed kind of combustions. So they can, to a certain extent, minimize the NOx and SOx emissions.
So I'll end with this the question and answer session, and I'll request Ms. Mehnaz Gadezi to invite our next presenter. Thank you very much, Dr. Saab.
Thank you, Isan. Dear participants, our next presenter of the webinar is Mr. Tularam Pudel. Mr. Tularam Pudel is working in SARC Energy Center, Islamabad as Research Fellow Energy Trade. He is on deputation from Department of Electricity Development, Ministry of Energy, Water Resources and Irrigation from Nepal, where he was working as a senior divisional engineer. He holds bachelor's degree in electrical engineering from Nepal and master's degree M.Tech in energy system from Indian Institute of Technology, India. During his professional career, he has been involved in various energy-related projects, government policy making, drafting of regulatory guidelines, and implementation activities. With this, I would like to request Mr. Tularam Pudel to proceed with his presentations on implication of Paris Agreement for thermal power generation. With this, I would like to invite Mr. Pudel over to Mr. Tularam Pudel. Thank you.
So dear participants, meanwhile note that you will have the opportunity to ask questions to our presenters by typing your questions under the question tab or the Google webinar panel. So with this, over to Tularam sir.
Am I audible? Thank you, Mehnaz, on my introduction, and thank you, Isanullah sir, for inviting me. So I'm going to talk about the implication of Paris Agreement for the thermal power generation. So this Paris Agreement, as covered briefly by this earlier Mr. Imran. So I'll be talking on these topics. This is the Paris Agreement among the multilateral process. Then I'll give short review of the goals and key features, and then the global and SARC scenario of thermal power generation. Then mostly I'll be covering of the NDC. It's the main fundamental block of under the Paris Agreement and initiatives, and mainly thermally dominated country in context of SARC, that is Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. So here you can see this the timeline of the multilateral process like this. Earlier, I think the climate change was not so realized. However, there was accumulated this emission from the industrial area, but in the 90s there was a main this umbrella convention, UNFCCC, and then followed by 1997 Kyoto Protocol, then Copenhagen Accord in 2009, Cancun Agreement 2010, then the Paris Agreement 2015, and Katowice Climate Package 2018. So what we can see that the environmental concern is becoming very urgent now than earlier, and it is just changing from the first it was environmental, and then it was the development concern. Now the climate change concern is shifting to the existential, that it is threatening the life. So with that, the Paris Agreement, it is an international agreement to combat climate change, and it was adopted on the 12 December 2015 by the COP21, and this came into the force on 4th November. So there is some sort of process to come into the force. There are at least 55 countries and who are contributing more than the 55% of the total emission. They have to ratify. And then because of that process, it came to force on the 4th November 2016, and it intends to reduce and mitigate the greenhouse gas emission. So now here is some goal of Paris Agreement. So this is a very long-term goal, or you can say the temperature goal of the Paris Agreement. Here we can see the global temperature is rising. We can from 1880. So it was minus 0.3. It's a average temperature, global average. Because there is in the Antarctic there is a very cold, below maybe minus 60, minus 70, and there is a high temperature of up to the like the 60 and above 65 in the like Iran and the Saudi Arabia, like that. So that's why the global temperature just is increasing. And the second is the to strengthen the ability of countries to deal with the impact of the climate change. So this is mainly adaptation goal, or the how can we align to our response to climate change. And in order to achieve or the mitigation measure and adaptation, there should be the concept of financing, and to implement that the goal or this plan, we need a financing and the new technology to be there in the place, and with the enhanced capacity building. So these framework are also have been established in the following meeting of the Paris Agreement. So these are principle of Paris Agreement that follows the equity but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities in light of differentiated national circumstances. So this is also the differentiated responsibilities and equity. This is the principle of the FNCC. See, because it's a slightly different than equality, because there is a developed countries and the developing countries, least developed countries, and they have a different technological advancement, and they have different capacity. They are using the different resource of energy. So there's the developed country will have the leading role to combat this climate change, and also the developing countries also participated with their capacity. Also, it can be said that the climate change is not neutral to gender, because it has impact differently on the gender because of the social structure and their role and that kind of thing. So there is a differentiated responsibility. This is mainly in light of national circumstances. So now I'm going to talk about some features of the Paris Agreement, because my topic given is the Paris Agreement and that implication on the thermal power plant. So there is a climate neutrality. So whatever the emission is produced from the man-made activities, and that should be removed by the sink of greenhouse gases in the second half of the century, from the 2050 up to the this last of the 21st century. And there is the plan of the climate neutral. So this is estimated to begin between this half century. So other is this mitigation, and mitigation is the binding commitment by all the parties, and what they do is that they prepare, communicate, and maintain nationally determined contribution with the party of the Paris Agreement to pursue the domestic measure to achieve them. So this NDC is the main fundamental block of the Paris Agreement for the action. So I'll be talking about later for this NDC for the different countries' perspective. So other is the sink and reservoir is the for the climate neutrality. There is a provision of sink and reservoir. Mainly there are three. The sink in the one is the under land and the ocean and the tree who consume the greenhouse gases. So continue with the Paris Agreement. This there is a voluntary cooperation because there is the ambitious plan also because one single country so may not come up with the proper mitigation plan, and for this there is a voluntary cooperation. It may be between countries or the regional level, between developing and the developed country. So other is the adaptation. Adaptation to enhance adaptive capacity, strengthen resilience, and reduce vulnerability to climate change. All parties should engage in adaptation, including by formulating and implementing national adaptation plan. So this is the national adaptation plan also required for the technology and a lot of the finance. And so other feature is the loss and damage. In the Paris Agreement, the other feature is the mention is they recognize the importance of averting and minimizing and addressing the loss. And the finance, technology, and capacity building support is the another main important because the NDC, as I mentioned earlier, these are put into the action through the adequate finance. And there are three sources of finance within the country from the national this the income and other is from the green climate fund, other fund like the adaptation fund, the country development fund, there are fund, and the other is from the multinational or the development partner. So there is a provision of resource and to balance between adaptation and mitigation. So to use the resources, there should be better balance. However, the adaptation and mitigation go side by side. Then which is the optimized and how to balance. So there is a provision of using the resources. So agreement also provides this financial mechanism, as I already said, and the one main is the green climate fund. And just I want to share with that the Nepal just 6 days ago in the October 6th, Nepal got this GCF, this green climate fund of the nearly 49 million US dollar for the clean cooking solution. So this is the very good provision, and the other technology framework is also established under the agreement. So capacity building activities like the climate change education, training, as well as public awareness and participation and access to information also have been included in the Paris Agreement. So transparency, implementation and compliance. So reporting information submitted by each party is under NDC and is a progress yearly, and they undergo for the international technical review for the transparency purpose, and include a mechanism that will facilitate implementation and for promotion, and in a way that the non-adversarial and the non-punitive manner, and will report annually to CMA. It's a meeting of the Paris Agreement. So there is a concept of global stock take. In the country are binded to provide their contribution, and there is a global state in every 5-year cycle. In that the information are collected from the international expert, from the other report, and from the report given by the parties, and they are analyzed, and the global state is placed in the first time in the 23rd, then after every 5 years. It's up to the many years, up to 2050 or maybe last of the century. It's not decided. So this is a overall landscape. So this is landscape of the Paris Agreement. We can see the proposed objective is long-term temperature goal of 2 degrees centigrade, and there's the action and the means of implementation. This the middle portion is the very important building block. This is the action to adaptation and mitigation, and means of implementation, finance, technology development and transfer, and then capacity building. So the whole NDC, what the parties submit to this convention, these things are included. What is their adaptation measures and adaptation plan and mitigation, and how they have to estimate what is the requirement of finance and what technology they need and what capacity they develop. So these action and means of implementation are broadly mentioned in their NDC. It's not coming. My page is not running. You can see. So what is NDC? The Paris Agreement requires that each party to UNFCCC prepare, update, and communicate it nationally determined contribution document declaring the action it plan to undertake to combat climate change. So in the coming slide, I am going to talk about this NDC. What are the NDC regarding the that are related to thermal power plant for the India, this Bangladesh, and Pakistan and Sri Lanka. So okay, so this is an emission mechanism in the Paris Agreement. So the Paris, so first NDC was mandated to provide on the 2015. Then the second is 2020, and after each 5-year interval, then 25 and 2030. This the communicate the new updated NDCs, and other the global stake take place in every 5 years. That is starting from the 2023 and 2028 and so on. It's a emission mechanism and the global scenario of the thermal power plant. So according to the field type, I have categorized the 4: coal, gas, oil, and renewable. So this the total installed capacity is the 5,700 gigawatt. This is the case of above 1 megawatt. So we can see the coal and gas and oil. This the thermal is the dominated. Of course, the coal is the 34%. So it is said that the globally 80% of the coal capacity has to retire by 2030 to meet the target of temperature below the 1.5 degrees Celsius. So what is the scenario of the thermal contribution in SAR? So we can see that the Afghanistan is thermal 50% and Bangladesh gas 53 and furnace oil 27%. And Bhutan as no, this all the hydro dominated, and the India the coal contribution 54 and Maldives oil 96. Then we can see here the domination in the South Asian countries is of the this thermal power plant. So this is a climate risk index of South Asian countries. So Pakistan is the most vulnerable countries and very susceptible to climate change, and its rank is 5. That is as per the climate index 99 to 2018. This annual average, and then this is Pakistan is followed by Bangladesh is 7 and the Nepal is 9. We can see here this red, dark red, and India is also there. This is between 11 to 20. And the Bhutan also falls in the 11 to 20. So let's see the India thermal power related to respond to the Paris Agreement. So to reduce the emission intensity of its GDP by 20-25% by 20 and the 30-35% by the 2030 from the 2005 level. This is the emission target of the India, and similarly about 40% of cumulative electric power installed capacity from the non-fossil fuel based energy resources by 2030. This is a target, another target. And also India has the plan. These all things are the content of the NDC. So India is planning for the additional carbon sink of 2.5 to 3 billion ton of CO2. And also India has advocated for the global alliance, the cooperation for R&D, particularly in the clean technology. So moreover, this renovation and the modernization of life extension of existing coal power station is being undertaken in the phased manner, and about 144 old thermal power stations have been assigned mandatory target for improving energy efficiency. Then coal beneficiation has been made mandatory, and shifting towards supercritical technology for coal-based power plant. And there is a concept of introduction of the ultra supercritical technology, because these are very costly and it's required lots of fund. So there's a fly ash utilization policy in India to use the fly ash for the construction and as a replacement of the cement, and within the radius of the 100 kilometers from the coal-based thermal power plant, and it has been mandated to the policy, and to utilize ash for also the backfilling of the mine. Some fiscal responses India has introduced, like the coal cess and the cotton subsidies, and India has established two funds, Clean Environment Fund and the National Adaptation Fund. And just we can see that the cess imposed on the coal in 2010 was the INR 50 per ton, and now recently that increased to INR 200 per ton of coal, and this is used for the Clean Environment Fund, and they have set the National Adaptation Fund with a sum of 55.6 million US dollar. Then they have increased in tax on petrol and diesel, and they have introduced to market mechanism, that is REC and PAT. Also there is a regulatory regime of the renewable purchase obligation, RPO. So here you can see the regime from the subsidy is changing to what the tax regime. Let's see the Pakistan thermal power related response in the spirit of the Paris Agreement. So Pakistan in this statement, it intends to reduce up to 20% of its 2030 projected emission to availability of the international grant, about 40 billion at the current price. At the current price mean is the NDC of 2016, the first NDC. So over the last 21 years, the overall increase in the emission was approximately 123%, and Pakistan Vision 2025 is guiding the INDC. And Vision 25 envisages adding 25,000 megawatt of electricity, and there is a improvement of the coal efficiency. Also, they have plan for the plant coal-based power generation. And coming to Bangladesh, and Bangladesh in their INDC, they have mentioned they have the ambitious GHG reduction target of the 15%. 5% unconditional and 10% conditional. Conditional, I mean, provided that they are getting fund from the outside, and unconditional means they have their in-house capacity to implement. So Bangladesh want to actively play its part in global collective action to reduce further GHG emission, and government is repowering old steam turbine to increase efficiency. So they have planned of 800 megawatt additional generation capacity to be brought online by 2030 through repowering of steam turbine. So I'm mainly focusing only the thermal power related this plan. So although there are adaptation plans that include the agriculture and the fishery and the other many sector. So in Bangladesh, still coal-based generation option are also highest prioritized plan in Bangladesh, because you know these in Bangladesh there is a resource prawns, mainly the hydro capacity is only 700 I think 50 megawatt, and the population is very high. Maybe the land availability may be low for the solar. So the coal-based generation is the prioritized, and also because coal reserve are not recovered in Bangladesh. So they have the many coal reserve, like they more than 800 million metric ton. So the revised power system master plan invites the 30 gigawatt of new coal capacity by 2030 using clean coal technology. And the support will be needed in terms of the finance, technology transfer, and capacity building to implement this clean coal technology. So, and Bangladesh has planned to use coal technologies. This IGCC and the CCS, carbon this storage, carbon capture and storage. This they have made plan. So with the use of fossil fuel waste energy economy, carbon footprint might go to half of that the United States. So it's a very difficult situation, I think, that the Bangladesh is not, because they are planning to use the coal technology. So it is very threatening. So they have to shift their plan to introduce more of the renewable energy. Otherwise, that may be the complication. I mean, legal some concern. So establishment of procedure and process for actively monitoring and reporting total emission from the coal-based generation, and they have planned for the retrofitting of the coal generation asset. And now the Sri Lanka thermal power related response, and the Sri Lanka per capita greenhouse gas emission in 2010 was 1.02 ton, and the global cumulative contribution in 2019 was 0.03%. And no new coal power plant are expected in the future. They are discouraged coal power plant in the Sri Lanka. And what the effort has been made is the converting existing fuel-based combined cycle power plant to the natural gas based. So development of hydropower is given priority this time to exploit the full maximum capacity around 300 megawatt, and they have planned to introduce the approximately 800 megawatt of wind and the 2000 megawatt of solar. The conversion of existing 600 megawatt of fuel oil combined cycle power plant to natural gas. This is a target by 2021 up to 2026, and establishment of new combined cycle power plant in place of anticipated coal power capacity, because the coal power capacity is discouraged over here, and they have planned for the approximate 700 megawatt capacity to be operated from natural gas. This is a plan of the target of the 2021 to 2027. So overall, they have the target of emission reduction of the 25% in electricity sector. So this is the overall. I gone through some of the these thermally dominated countries scenario. So with this, what we can do to reduce the emission from the coal power plan is that we can go for the clean coal technology, and we can go for the combined gas cycle and other the management of the supply air. So this kind of technology we can use. So lastly, the earth has enough resource to meet people's need, but they will never have enough to satisfy people need. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Tulara. It was indeed a very detailed and very specific presentation. So obviously we have certain questions for you. We have a question from Nepal. They wanted to know that what is the quality of emission carbon dioxide from SAARC region?
Yeah, thank you, sir, for the question. Actually, this energy sector is responsible for the 2/3 of the the emission, and I think in the global case, this 2019 the emission was around 6 gigaton, and in case of I think SAARC region is around 2 to 3 in between. 2 to 3 gigaton, I think.
Right. So there is another similar question, but they are really related it to Paris Agreement. It says that in light of Paris Agreement, how you see SAARC countries ranking in GHG emissions. It's similar, but they would just want to maybe rank related it to Paris Agreement.
Yeah, I think in SAARC region, I think SAARC region countries, they occupy the I think 23rd of the world population, and but the emission is the very less. I think up to 10% of the total globally producing. And also the SAARC region not missed the target because there was the plan of the introduction of renewable energy to the system around 25% by 2030. So I think the SAARC countries are in the track, and they have maintained the emission.
Right. So again, it's a connected question that how can SAARC Energy Center facilitate its member states in achieving the targets set in Paris Agreement? I mean, what's the role of center you can see?
Yeah, actually, SAARC Energy Center have intervened already through the many studies. Last time the SAARC Energy Center conducted a study on the killing coal technologies, and it had conducted the many the online training after this COVID-19. So for the renewable energy, and I think it has introduced the most of the intervention. I think from establishment, I think more than 150. So in every aspect, there is a that is the related with the coal reduction also, some studies.
Okay. Again, a question in Pakistan perspective, since you mentioned some cases from Nepal as well, that the government of Pakistan is planning to import, rather is importing LNG and coal for power generation. Is this in line with the NDC submitted to Pakistan, submitted by Pakistan to UNFCCC?
Yes, sir. What happened is that as per the Paris Agreement, that every country has sovereign, isn't it? They plan as per their need and the country circumstances. I think the Pakistan is doing what should be done there, isn't it? So also Pakistan have the good energy mix. They have the hydro and the thermal. So in that perspective, and the Pakistan is doing good, but Pakistan has to still go for the clean technology for the coal mainly, because the gas there is, of course, the emission is less. And almost all SAARC countries are, I think, in Bangladesh is in difficult condition. Otherwise, the India has a very steep this ambition goal of the introduction of the 175 gigawatt of renewable by 2020, and they have cut down their coal generation from the, I think it's coming to 55%.
Yes, absolutely. Same is going with China. They have
Yeah.
reduced their coal generation from 60% to around 45%.
Yeah.
So there is another question that it's again from Pakistan's perspective that the vision of the current Prime Minister regarding billion tree tsunami, is it a role model project for other countries to follow?
Yeah, I think government Pakistan is already, it is very susceptible to the climate change, and the this Pakistan has the vision to collaborate and make alliance with the other countries, and he has already vision to take the lead on that, and it is an announcement from the state of the head of the state, and the Pakistan also there is a dedicated ministry of the climate change. That's a very good thing. In the other SAARC countries, I think they are mixed up with like other this environment and the energy. But the Pakistan has a specialty, and that is the dedicated ministry in the name of the climate change, and they have the very still plan of the planting the billion of these trees. So Pakistan can do that because it is also in the rank. It's the 6-4. It is a below the in the climate risk index. It is a below 10. So also Pakistan can have the right to lead alliance.
Right. So thank you very much, Mr. Tularam. With this, we end this question and answer session. I will be the conclusion. So thank you again, Dr. Imran Ali Shah and Mr. Tularam Powder, for sharing your knowledge and taking us through the details. Thank you for sharing for the excellent response to the queries raised by the participants. So, ladies and gentlemen, we came across many interesting and useful information through the presentations. I believe many good experiences have been shared and good lessons learned. I would like to pay my deep respect to all the participants for their enthusiasm and positive participation in this webinar. Dear audience, please connect us through our digital channels to remain updated about our upcoming events. Our social media handles are displayed on this, displayed shortly on the screen for your ease. Finally, I would like to thank our own staff for organizing this event and ensuring it ran so smoothly. I would like to close my remarks and officially announce the end of the webinar. Wishing the future prosperity of South Asian nations. Thank you for your attention. May God bless you all.